as you may have noticed, it's November, and my feeds are just like sports, elections, NaNoWriMo. It is the end of week 1. As I mentioned on my blog, and I've mentioned it in a few other places, I love NaNoWriMo. One of the things with NaNoWriMo, and I understand why they do this, they say, you have to write a novel, it has to be one novel, it has to be 50,000 words all has to go on one thing. And if you want to break that rule, then do Camp NaNoWriMo. But for me, it's not always. I try to make NaNoWriMo as productive as possible, and for me, that's not always productive. So, for instance, this year, I'm doing my own thing. I'm going kind of crazy. In October, I wrote 62,000 words on Vapor Trail, which is the follow-up novel to Medium Rare, which came out this last May. And it's a Medium Rare and Vapor Trail are books in the Profane series, which is a companion series to the Blood and Bone trilogy. And what I mean by companion series is they take place in the same world, they take place in the same city. One of the protagonists is a cousin. Vector Clanahan is Patrick Clanahan's cousin. And we see a lot of familiar faces, like the medical examiner, still Dr. Lynch. She still has Toby, her somewhat squeamish assistant. We see Patrick Clanahan popping up. Sabira Mallory makes several appearances, mostly in Vapor Trail. So Medium Rare takes place pretty much concurrently with the Convergence series, which is book 2 in the Blood and Bone trilogy. And then Vapor Trail takes place in the second half of Convergence theory and in the very beginning of the Symbiotic Law. And it's all setting up to a sequel to the Symbiotic Law. Back to NaNoWriMo. I had about 15,000 words left to write on Vapor Trail at the end of October, and so I said, you know what? First thing I'm going to do for NaNoWriMo is I'm going to finish Vapor Trail. And that's what I mean when I talk about I try to make NaNoWriMo as productive as possible, because for me, I have so many books to write, but it's not productive for me to stop working on my current work in progress, my current WIP, and start a new WIP. 50,000 words is not enough for a novel, and so then I'd have 2 half-finished novels. That's not productive. So I'm going to be working on 2 short stories, and then, depending on how many words left I have to write, and I'm not doing 50,000 words, I'm going to try to write 60,000 this month, just to push myself a little bit harder, because I know I can write 50,000 words. 60,000 words is a little bit tougher for me to put out and not run out of steam. So it's a good challenge. So at the end of the month, after those projects, whatever I have left to hit that goal, I'm going to be working on Blood and Bone, Book 4, The Sanguine Solution, which takes place a couple of months after the end of Symbiotic Law. The Book 4 is going to pick up in December of that year, and it's going to be dealing with all of the emotional fallout of the Symbiotic Law, because the Symbiotic Law ended where I wanted it to end. That was the ending I always had in mind. There's an epilogue in that book that takes place 6 months later, and it's very short, and it's like the guys are in spoilers. The book's almost 2 years old, but it ends with on a happy note for the characters. Like the last scene, the second to last chapter, it ends on a real downer note, and then there's an epilogue, it ends happily, and you get kind of like a happily ever after, right? But you kind of wonder, how did they get from this really depressing ending to their happily ever after? So that's what Book 4 is for, because there are some world elements that I didn't get to touch on in the main trilogy that I think are really interesting, especially having to do with the Three Sisters Magic Shop, which, if you couldn't tell, Edie and Leilani are just my favorite secondary characters, though I also love Sabira Mallory. Edie, Leilani, and Sabira Mallory, they're my gals, and I love them, and I have more to say about, specifically, the 2 sisters. And, Ethan has just a boatload of emotional issues and complications. And also, I really wanted to now that the guys are finally, Ethan and Pat finally like get their happily ever after, they have to actually work through their relationship problems, because the first 3 books are just them sort of getting together, not getting together, and getting together, not getting together, and they don't actually deal with any of the differences that make them seem not very compatible. And I really want to dive into that, because I don't believe in easy ever afters. Oh, the 2 short stories I'm gonna briefly touch on, because one of them I'm going to be writing to try to include in a anthology. And however that, I mean, like, I don't know if it'll get accepted, but that's what I'm writing it for. I've got an idea, came to me the other day, and I was like, that would be funny and cute, and I'll write it, and if it gets accepted, you'll hear about it, and if not, you'll read about it next year when I publish it myself, I guess. I don't know. But the other thing I'm working on is I wrote a short story, which you may or may not have read, called Cold Press, about 2 years ago. Christmas 2014, I think. It's set in a small town in eastern Washington, and I've been meaning to write more, because it's called a Palouse County Romance #1, but there's no #2 or anything else, and I do plan on writing more, and #2 is gonna get written this month, I swear to God. It's just, the story is gonna take the series in a slightly unexpected turn. At the time of recording this, I haven't done today's writing, and it's now 10:15, which means I need to wrap this up and like actually get on my laptop and type away. But it's going pretty good. So far I've written a little over 10,000 words. I'm gonna write another 2,000 words before midnight, but I'm pretty on track. See ya!